Welcome to the Backed by Science podcast, hosted by the Wonder Drop. Today, we are doing a deep dive into a topic that is, well, it's absolutely everywhere in the fitness world right now. Testosterone. What it is, why it matters, how you might be able to naturally influence your levels, and maybe most importantly, uh, what the science really says about all those supplements claiming to boost T.
Yeah, and this deep dive is particularly relevant because it's specifically designed for you, our listener. We're actually working from sources you've shared with us.
Right.
So we're trying to tackle those common questions and, curiosities that fitness enthusiasts have, people who want to understand this pretty complex topic
Yeah.
without needing a medical degree.
Definitely. It's an area where there's just so much information floating around, and frankly, a lot of conflicting claims too, especially when you get into the supplement side of things.
For sure.
And as you know, if you're into fitness, testosterone isn't just about trying to pack on, an extra inch on your bicep, although that's definitely a big reason people pay attention.
Yeah, that's a motivator.
But it's such a fundamental hormone. It touches on so many aspects of health, energy, mood, bone health, even your long-term risk for certain diseases. It's broad.
Absolutely. So our mission today, kind of guided by the sources you sent in, is to cut through some of that noise. We want to give you the clearest, most evidence-based picture we can.
Okay.
What testosterone does, the lifestyle factors that the science really confirms can influence it naturally, and then take a really critical look at the evidence behind those popular herbal supplements marketed as T boosters.
Sounds good. Let's get this deep dive started then. Okay, let's really unpack this first section. Understanding testosterone, the basics. So zooming right in, at its core, what exactly is testosterone?
All right, let's start with the absolute fundamentals. Testosterone belongs to a group of hormones called androgens, which are basically steroid hormones.
Okay.
Think of it like a chemical messenger, like lots of hormones in your body.
Yeah.
Travels through your bloodstream, binds to specific receptors in different tissues, and tells them to do certain things.
And where does the body primarily make this hormone? Most people associate it mainly with men, right?
That's right. The primary production site, the main factory, is the testicles in people assigned to male at birth. But, and this is important to remember, it's also produced in smaller but still significant amounts by the ovaries in people assigned to female at birth.
Ah, okay.
And then tiny amounts come from the adrenal glands, which sit kind of on top of your kidneys, in both sexes. So look, testosterone is present in everyone, but the levels and its main roles differ quite a bit between biological sexes.
Got it. So while it's important in women too, maybe for things like bone density and sexual well-being, its role in males is just much more dominant.
Precisely. In people assigned male at birth, it's the primary sex hormone, and its influence is huge, especially during development.
What are some of those really crucial roles, particularly as someone goes through puberty?
Oh, during male puberty, testosterone is the absolute powerhouse. It's driving those major physical transformations we all recognize.
Okay.
We're talking about the big increase in muscle mass and strength, the voice deepening, the growth of facial and body hair, changes in bone structure and density too, and of course the maturation of the reproductive organs. It really sculpts the body into its adult male form.
But it doesn't just switch off after puberty, does it? I mean, it's still vital throughout a man's entire adult life.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah, its importance continues well into adulthood. Healthy levels are essential just for maintaining general health.
How so?
Well, things like sustaining bone density, regulating mood. Low testosterone is sometimes linked to increased irritability or depression, supporting cognitive function, playing a key role in cardiovascular health, overall disease risk, and of course it's critical for sexual function.
Right, the obvious one.
Yeah, impacting sex drive, erectile function, and the production of sperm.
Which naturally brings us right back to why our fitness-focused listeners care so much. Its key role in increasing muscle mass and strength.
Exactly. For anyone pursuing physique goals or looking to build strength, optimal testosterone levels are directly linked to better muscle protein synthesis and that overall anabolic drive.
Okay.
That's a central piece of that whole puzzle.
Okay, so it's a lifelong hormone, vital for many functions, and yes, a major player in muscle and strength. But the sources you shared mention a natural decline that happens with age in men. What does that typically look like?
Yes, this is very common and pretty normal physiological process.
Yeah.
Starting typically around age 30, sometimes a bit later. Testosterone levels in men tend to begin a gradual decline.
Oh, gradual.
The sources estimate it's roughly a drop of about 1% to maybe 2% per year. It's not like it's falling off a cliff, more like a slow, steady decrease over decades.
Why does this happen? What's going on in the body to cause that?
It's multifactorial, meaning there isn't just one reason. Several things contribute. The sources point to a few key ones.
Okay.
Firstly, the testicles themselves just seem to become slightly less efficient at producing testosterone over time. The machinery slows down a bit.
Right.
Secondly, the signaling from the brain's pituitary gland, which sends out luteinizing hormone, or LH, telling the testes to make testosterone that signal, can also decrease a bit.
So the factory gets a weaker signal.
Kind of, yeah. And then there's this interesting protein that becomes more common as men age. Sex hormone binding globulin, or SHBG.
SHBG, that sounds important. Tell us more about that one.
Okay, so SHBG is a protein made mostly by your liver. It circulates in your blood, and like the name suggests, it binds tightly to sex hormones, including testosterone.
And when it's bound up like that?
When testosterone is bound to SHBG, it's largely unavailable to bind to the receptors in your tissues and actually do its job. It can't exert its effects.
So it's essentially taking testosterone out of circulation, or at least out of action, like putting it in storage almost.
Exactly. That's a good way to think about it. I think of it like this. Total testosterone is all the testosterone floating around in your blood, but only a really small percentage is free, meaning it's not bound to SHBG or other proteins like albumin, which it binds to more weakly.
How small a percentage?
The sources note it's only about 2% of your total testosterone that's typically free. The vast majority is bound up, mostly tightly to SHBG.
And that free or maybe bioavailable part is often considered more clinically relevant then.
Yes, especially as men get older and those SHBG levels tend to naturally rise. Bioavailable testosterone includes the free stuff plus the bit that's weakly bound to albumin.
Right.
The sources highlight that free or bioavailable testosterone might actually be considered more important measures, especially when assessing symptoms in aging men, because this is the portion that's actually active and can get into cells and do things.
So you could have a total T number that looks okay on paper.
Exactly. But if your SHBG is very high, your usable free testosterone might actually be low, and that could potentially lead to symptoms. That's why doctors sometimes look at these different measures, to get the full picture.
That makes a lot of sense. So given this natural decline and the whole complexity of free versus bound T, how would someone even begin to know if their levels might be too low? Especially if the sources say many men with low T might not even have noticeable symptoms.
Yeah, that's a really crucial point. Low testosterone, often medically called hypogonadism, doesn't always scream its presence with obvious signs.
Right.
But when symptoms do occur, they can range from subtle and kind of general feelings to more specific issues that might impact daily life and, well, certainly fitness goals.
Okay, so for our listeners who are generally pretty tuned in to their bodies and performance, what are the specific red flags or symptoms they might notice that could point towards low T?
All right, the sources list several symptoms that are particularly relevant to someone in the fitness community. Things like persistent fatigue or a significant drop in energy levels that just doesn't seem to get better with rest. Difficulty with concentration or experiencing what feels like brain fog. You might notice mood changes, maybe increased irritability, feelings of sadness, or even symptoms that look like depression.
What about performance or drive?
Reduced sex drive or libido, that's a common one, as are difficulties with erectile function. And in some cases, it can contribute to infertility.
And those physical changes we talked about earlier, the muscle mass and body fat.
Absolutely. A noticeable decrease in muscle mass and strength, even if you're hitting the gym consistently, that can be a sign. And conversely, an increase in body fat, particularly the kind that gathers around the abdomen, that visceral fat.
Right, the dangerous stuff.
Yeah, that could be a key indicator too.
Yeah.
If you feel like you're putting in the work with your diet and exercise, but seeing less return than you'd expect, low testosterone could potentially be a contributing factor. It's worth considering.
So beyond just feeling a bit off, these symptoms directly relate to both how you feel day to day and your actual progress in fitness.
Precisely. And the sources actually take this a step further. They link chronically low testosterone levels, not just to these immediate symptoms, but also to increased long-term health risks.
Not quite.
They cite research associating low T with higher rates of obesity, an increased risk for various chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular problems, and even in some studies, an increased risk of premature death.
Wow. Okay, that really elevates the importance of understanding this. It's not just about chasing peak performance in the gym. It's about fundamental health and longevity, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It really underscores why paying attention to your levels, especially if you're experiencing some of these symptoms, is important for your holistic health and for effectively supporting your fitness and wellness journey in the long run.
Okay, so if you are experiencing some of these symptoms or you just have concerns,
Right.
what's the next logical step according to the sources?
The clear recommendation is to go see a healthcare professional, your
Yep.
doctor. They can perform a simple blood test to actually measure your testosterone levels. And it's crucial to note, as the sources highlight, that timing really matters for this test.
How so?
Testosterone levels naturally fluctuate throughout the day. They typically peak in the morning. So the blood work is usually recommended to be done in the morning, ideally before 10 a.m., to get the most accurate, reliable reading.
And is there like a clear, universally agreed upon cutoff for what's considered low T, like a magic number?
Well, the sources mention that a general normal range for total testosterone is often considered 300 nanograms per deciliter, NGDL, or higher.
Okay.
However, they also wisely point out that defining truly optimal levels is actually much more complex and can be quite controversial. It's really not just about hitting a single number on a lab report.
So it's more personalized.
Exactly. A doctor will look at your numbers in the context of your age, your specific symptoms, your overall health picture. Someone might have a level slightly below 300 but feel perfectly fine, while someone else might have significant symptoms with a level that technically falls within the so-called normal range.
Right.
This is why that medical evaluation is essential. They can interpret the results in a way that's actually meaningful for you, the individual.
So if you've maybe had your levels checked, or perhaps you're just interested in supporting healthy testosterone production naturally as part of your overall health and fitness strategy, what do the sources say about lifestyle approaches? They seem to suggest this is often the first line of defense, right?
Yes, absolutely. Many healthcare professionals will strongly recommend prioritizing significant lifestyle modifications before even considering medical interventions like TRT, especially if levels are maybe borderline or symptoms are relatively mild. These fundamental habits can be incredibly powerful tools. They can potentially help slow that natural age-related decline we talked about, or maybe improve levels that are lower than optimal for you.
And for our fitness audience, the first one mentioned is something they're likely already deeply invested in: exercise and lifting weights.
Yeah, this one comes up again and again. It's consistently highlighted in the sources as one of the most effective and, importantly, evidence-backed ways to support healthy testosterone levels.
Is it just lifting, or does cardio count too?
Both seem to help. Both resistance training, which is your weightlifting or bodyweight exercises, and cardiovascular exercise like running, cycling, swimming, have been shown to have a positive impact.
Okay, but is one type maybe better than the other specifically for boosting T?
Well, the sources indicate that while both are beneficial, the largest and most consistent improvements in testosterone levels seem to come from moderate or high-intensity resistance training.
Ah, so lifting does edge it out a bit.
It seems so. And specifically, exercises that involve large muscle groups.
Like those big compound movements people talk about.
Exactly. Think squats, deadlifts, bench presses, rows, overhead presses, stuff like that. These exercises recruit multiple large muscles at the same time, which seems to trigger a greater hormonal response, including that testosterone release.
So for our listeners already hitting those compound lifts hard, that's fantastic news. They're directly supporting their hormonal health just by doing their regular training.
Pretty much, yeah. It's good reinforcement.
What's the next big lifestyle factor?
Weight management. This is absolutely crucial, and the sources really stress this point repeatedly. There's a very strong, very consistent link between maintaining a healthy body weight and having optimal testosterone levels.
How does having excess body fat, especially around the middle, actually affect testosterone? What's the mechanism there?
Okay, this is a key mechanism. Excess body fat, especially that visceral fat that accumulates deep around your abdominal organs,
Right.
contains an enzyme called aromatase. And this enzyme's main job is to convert androgens, including your testosterone, into estrogens.
Oh, wow. So more fat tissue equals more of this enzyme converting testosterone away into estrogen.
Precisely. More fat cells, particularly those abdominal ones, mean more aromatase activity happening. It's effectively siphoning off your testosterone and turning it into estrogen, which lowers the total amount of testosterone available in your body.
Okay, but losing weight can reverse this, right?
Yes, that's the really good news here. The sources cite research indicating that losing weight, typically through a combination of a balanced, calorie-controlled diet and regular exercise, can significantly help boost testosterone production.
How much of a boost are we talking?
Some studies suggest weight loss can increase testosterone by as much as 30%. Essentially, losing that fat reduces the aromatase activity, allowing more of your testosterone to remain as testosterone. It's a really powerful incentive for weight loss if low T is a concern, or even just for optimizing levels.
What about diet specifically, beyond just managing calories for weight loss? Are there particular dietary patterns or maybe specific foods that the sources link to supporting healthy tea?
A well-rounded dietary approach is really what the sources emphasize most.
Makes sense.
This means getting a good balance of macronutrients, enough protein to support muscle repair and growth, healthy fats.
Which are important for hormones, right?
Absolutely. Healthy fats like those in avocados, nuts, seeds, olive oil, fatty fish. They are literally the essential building blocks for steroid hormones,
Mm.
like testosterone. And then complex carbohydrates for energy. Focusing on nutrient-dense whole foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains provides the vitamins and minerals needed for overall endocrine function.
Did the sources mention any specific superfoods for tea? People always ask about those.
They did list a few that have been linked in some studies, although the overall dietary pattern is always more important than fixating on single foods.
Sure.
But examples mentioned included onions, oysters, often cited because they're packed with zinc fatty fish like salmon, which are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, and extra virgin olive oil. Interesting stuff, but probably best viewed as components of an overall healthy diet rather than some kind of magic bullet.
Right, no magic tea boosting pizza, unfortunately.
Not that the sources mention, no.
Okay, so beyond these positive habits, what about the negative lifestyle factors we should be aware of? The things that can actively hurt testosterone levels?
The sources are quite clear on a few key ones. Excessive alcohol consumption is definitely a big one.
How does alcohol affect tea?
Chronic, heavy drinking can directly impair hormone production in the testicles. It can also disrupt that whole brain-pituitary-test communication axis we talked about, leading to lower testosterone levels. Plus, it negatively impacts sexual function and can reduce sperm count.
So moderation is key.
Yeah, the general recommendation is to reduce or ideally avoid excessive alcohol. Limiting intake to no more than maybe one standard drink per day is often suggested as a general guideline for health.
Smoking seems like another obvious one to avoid for general health. Does it hurt tea?
Yes.
Yeah.
Nicotine in tobacco has been linked to lower testosterone, although the sources do mention that some studies have shown kind of conflicting results on that direct link. However, what's absolutely undeniable is that smoking significantly harms overall male reproductive health. It negatively affects sperm count, sperm motility, which is how well they swim, and morphology, their shape. So even if the direct link to T levels is debated a bit in some studies, quitting smoking is unequivocally beneficial for male health across the board.
Good point. And what about something that might be less on people's radar?
Environmental toxins. This is an interesting area. The sources specifically mention chemicals like bisphenol A or BPA.
That's the stuff in some plastics, right?
Exactly. Found in some plastics, the lining of some food cans, things like that. BPA is known as an endocrine disruptor, meaning it can interfere with your body's hormone system.
And it affects tea?
Studies have associated BPA exposure with decreased testosterone levels and also reduced sperm count. So trying to avoid BPA-containing products, maybe opting for fresh food when possible, using glass or stainless steel containers, looking for BPA-free labels is probably a sensible strategy.
Okay, this is all really practical advice. Exercise right, manage weight, eat well, limit alcohol, don't smoke, maybe watch out for BPA. But there's another point the sources emphasize, which seems particularly critical for our listeners who train really intensely or focus heavily on dieting: the impact of low energy availability.
Yes, this is absolutely a key takeaway, especially for athletes, bodybuilders, or really anyone going through a rigorous cutting phase or maintaining very low body fat. Low energy availability happens when you consistently expend significantly more calories through exercise and daily activity than you consume through your diet.
So a big calorie deficit?
Essentially, yes. But more specifically, it means there isn't enough energy left over to support all essential bodily functions after you account for the energy demands of your exercise.
And this large energy deficit hurts testosterone. How does that work physiologically?
It seems so, yes. The sources indicate that significant, prolonged energy deficits appear to negatively affect testosterone concentrations. The body seems to interpret this state of low energy availability as a form of major stress or even famine.
Survival mode.
Kind of, yeah. In response, it seems to downregulate or conserve energy by reducing functions it deems less critical for immediate survival. And unfortunately, optimal hormone production, including testosterone synthesis, seems to fall into that category sometimes. It's like the body's saying, okay, energy is really scarce right now. Let's prioritize basic survival functions over things like reproduction or building massive muscles.
That's a really powerful explanation. Can you give us some specific examples from the sources that really highlight this link? Research findings.
Sure. One finding noted a significant decrease in testosterone levels when overall dietary macronutrient intake was substantially reduced, leading to a large calorie deficit.
Okay.
Another study specifically imposed a 40% reduction in total caloric intake on participants. They observed a significant decrease in testosterone levels, even though the diet they were given was actually high in protein.
Wow, so even if you're hitting your protein targets for muscle repair, the massive overall deficit itself can still negatively impact T?
That's what that particular research suggests, yeah. The sources also mentioned studies on physique athletes like bodybuilders prepping for a show.
Right.
Those who significantly increased their training volume while simultaneously being in a strict energy deficit for contest prep experienced a significant reduction in testosterone compared to a control group who weren't restricting energy.
That makes sense. They push things to the extreme.
They do. There was also a study mentioned on long-distance runners. They categorized the runners based on their energy availability. Those with low energy availability, which they defined in that study as consuming less than 30 kilocalories per kilogram of fat-free mass per day after accounting for exercise expenditure.
Okay, that sounds technical. Can you break down gang-cal per kilogram of fat-free mass per day?
Sure. Fat-free mass is basically everything in your body that isn't fat, muscle, bone, organs, water. So this metric accounts for your individual size and your metabolic needs better than just looking at total calories. Less than 30 kilocalories per kilogram of FFM represents a pretty substantial energy deficit relative to your body's needs for basic function plus training recovery.
So it's a deep deficit.
Yes. For someone with, say, 70 kilograms of fat-free mass, that's consuming less than 2,100 calories after accounting for all the calories they burned exercising that day. It really highlights that deep, sustained calorie deficits, especially when you combine them with intense training, can put significant stress on your hormonal system. And in that runner study, those with low energy availability had significantly lower testosterone than the runners with moderate energy availability, who were in the 30-45 kilocag FFM range.
And there was also a point about the stress hormone cortisol in relation to this, wasn't there?
Yes, exactly. Another finding showed that intense exercise sessions that resulted in an energy deficit exceeding about 400 kcal led to significant elevations in cortisol, the body's main stress hormone, and corresponding decreases in testosterone when measured 24 hours later.
So high stress, low T.
Pretty much. This led to a lower testosterone to cortisol ratio, which is often used by sports scientists as a marker of overtraining or excessive physiological stress. A low ratio suggests your body is under significant strain, characterized by high cortisol and/or low testosterone.
This is a really actionable takeaway for anyone pushing themselves hard in the gym or dieting intensely. It's not just about hitting numbers on the scale or in the logbook. It's about finding a sustainable balance where you can still recover properly and support your hormonal health. Pushing too hard without adequate fuel can actually backfire on your T levels.
It's exactly right. It's a good reminder that sometimes less extreme deficits, or maybe incorporating structured recovery periods or refeed days, might be necessary not just for performance, but for fundamental endocrine function. It's about training smart and fueling smart, not just about relentless restriction.
Okay, that covers energy balance. What about specific micronutrients? We talked about a balanced diet overall, but the sources specifically mention zinc quite a bit.
Yes, zinc is definitely singled out in the sources as a mineral with a particularly important role in the endocrine system, especially when it comes to male reproductive health. It's essential as a cofactor for lots of enzymes involved in hormone metabolism.
How does it relate directly to testosterone production?
Well, one key way is that it's required for the synthesis and secretion of luteinizing hormone, or LH, which we mentioned earlier.
The signal from the brain.
Exactly. LH is produced by the pituitary gland in your brain, travels to the testicles, and basically tells them to produce testosterone. So zinc is directly involved in that crucial hormonal signaling cascade. No zinc, poor signal.
And it's also involved in converting testosterone to DHT, right? What's that about?
Yes, that's another important role. Zinc acts as a cofactor for the enzyme 5-alpha reductase. This enzyme converts testosterone into dihydrotestosterone, or DHT.
And DHT is?
DHT is actually a more potent form of androgen than testosterone itself. It has a stronger binding affinity to the androgen receptor in certain tissues, like the prostate and hair follicles. So zinc is involved both in producing testosterone via LH signaling and potentially in enhancing its activity through conversion to DHT.
So what happens if you don't get enough zinc? if you're deficient?
Zinc deficiency can directly impair testosterone synthesis. Studies have pretty consistently shown a correlation between lower zinc levels in the body and reduced testosterone concentrations.
Yeah.
The sources also note that competitive athletes might actually be at a greater risk for zinc deficiency compared to the general population.
Why is that?
It could be due to a couple of things. Increased losses through sweat during intense, prolonged exercise is one factor. Or potentially due to restrictive diets some athletes follow for weight management or body composition goals, which might not provide enough zinc.
So if someone is deficient, can supplementing with zinc help bring their T levels up?
Yes, the sources indicate that supplementation with zinc can be effective at restoring testosterone levels back up into the normal range. But, and this is a key point, this benefit seems to be primarily observed in individuals who are actually diagnosed with a zinc deficiency or who have demonstrably low baseline levels to begin with.
Okay, so it helps fix a deficiency. But what about if someone already has normal testosterone levels and normal zinc levels? Can taking extra zinc supplementation boost their T even higher, like beyond the normal range?
This is where the evidence gets much less clear-cut, more murky. The sources discuss some studies looking at this very question.
What did they find?
Well, one study showed that zinc sulfate supplementation did increase both total and free testosterone in young adults when they were tested before and after an exhaustive exercise session. That sounds promising.
Good.
But another study mentioned, this one in cyclists, found no significant difference in testosterone levels between a group that was supplemented with zinc and a placebo group over the study period.
So conflicting results. It's not definitively understood then if zinc supplementation helps augment or push testosterone levels higher when they're already within the normal healthy range. Its main role seems to be more about restoring levels that are low, specifically because of a deficiency.
Precisely. That seems to be the current understanding based on the evidence presented. More long-term, high-quality studies are really needed, especially in athletic populations, to fully understand the effects of zinc supplementation when deficiency isn't the primary issue.
So the key takeaway on zinc is
Ensuring adequate zinc intake through diet, think oysters, red meat, poultry, nuts, whole grains, or potentially through supplementation if you are genuinely deficient, appears important for supporting healthy T levels. But taking extra probably won't supercharge levels that are already normal.
Okay, so we've got a really solid foundation now on what testosterone is, why it matters, how to potentially identify issues, and some very clear evidence-backed natural strategies like exercise, weight management, diet, and managing that energy balance.
Right.
Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room, or maybe more accurately, the bottle on the supplement store shelf. Herbal supplements claiming to boost T.
Ah, yes, the magic pills.
This is where things get really interesting and often pretty confusing for people.
They absolutely do. The marketing around these supplements is just incredibly pervasive, isn't it? Especially within the fitness community. The idea of a natural pill that can significantly raise your testosterone levels without needing a prescription, it's very appealing. But we really need to look critically at what the science actually says, or perhaps more importantly, what it doesn't say.
You mentioned earlier one of the sources was a study that specifically investigated these supplements and their claims.
Yes, exactly. One of the key sources you provided is a systematic review that did just that. The researchers basically took 50 popular T booster supplements they found through a simple online search, the kind of stuff anyone might find, and they analyzed their ingredients and then dug into the scientific literature supporting the claims made about those ingredients and testosterone.
And what kind of claims were these supplements making? Stuff we see all the time.
Oh, yeah. Exactly the kinds of claims our listeners would be drawn to. The study found that a massive 90%, 9 out of 10 of these supplements explicitly claimed to boost T or boost free T.
Wow, okay.
Beyond that, 50% claimed they would improve libido and 48% promised you'd feel stronger. Many also made claims about building muscle mass, increasing energy, burning fat, improving recovery, all the hot buttons.
Those are some pretty bold claims directly targeting the goals of, well, anyone into fitness. But what did this systematic review find when they actually checked the published scientific data on the ingredients inside those bottles?
Okay, this is the really critical finding, and it's quite eye-opening, maybe even a bit shocking. So the 50 supplements they looked at contained a total of 109 unique individual components, different herbs, vitamins, minerals, etc.
Right.
The researchers then systematically searched the scientific literature for published data on the effect of each of these 109 components on testosterone levels in humans.
And what percentage actually had positive data showing they increase T?
Get this, only 24.8%, less than a quarter of the individual components in these T-booster supplements had any published data at all that showed an increase in testosterone with supplementation.
Less than a quarter. Wow. Okay, so what about the other three-quarters?
Well, this is where it gets even more concerning. 10.1%, about 1 in 10 of the components actually had published data showing they might decrease testosterone levels.
Decrease in a T-booster.
Yep. Another 18.3% had data showing absolutely no change in testosterone levels compared to placebo. And then the largest group by far, a staggering majority, 61.5%, had no data at all published on their effect on testosterone levels when used as a supplement in humans. Zero evidence.
Wait, let me get this straight. Over 60% of the unique ingredients found in these popular tea boosters have literally zero scientific studies published looking at whether they affect testosterone or not. And 10% actually have evidence suggesting they might lower it.
That's exactly what this systematic review found. And the picture gets even murkier, unfortunately.
How so?
Even among that small 24.8% group that had some published data showing an increase in T, more than half of those ingredients, 55.5% of them, also had conflicting data published, meaning other studies on the very same ingredient showed either no change or even a decrease in testosterone.
It's not just a lack of evidence for most ingredients. For the few that have any positive data, that data is often directly contradicted by other studies on the same thing. This really sounds like the marketing claims are just vastly outpacing the actual science.
That is precisely the conclusion that the systematic review and the sources overall point towards. The evidence base is incredibly weak for most of these ingredients' T-boosting claims.
Okay, let's maybe look at some specific herbs that come up frequently in these supplements. Fenugreek seems to be one that often gets positive buzz, right?
Right.
What did the review find about fenugreek seed extracts?
Right. Fenugreek is definitely one you see a lot. And interestingly, it actually showed the most consistent positive findings among the various herbs included in that specific systematic review we're talking about.
Okay, that's something.
4 out of the 6 studies they reviewed that looked specifically at fenugreek showed a statistically significant increase in total testosterone compared to placebo.
Were there specific examples of how much it increased T in the sources?
Yes, they noted some examples. One study using a specific specialized fenugreek extract reported an increase in total testosterone by about 12.2%, and, importantly, calculated free testosterone by 9.5% in a group of aging overweight men. Another study, using a different fenugreek extract, showed an increase in total testosterone by around 22.7% in young, healthy men. The review also noted that fenugreek generally demonstrated efficacy for increasing calculated free testosterone, FT, and bioavailable testosterone, BT, in most of the studies that actually measured these more clinically relevant forms, not just total T.
Any other potential benefits noted?
Yeah, some of the fenugreek studies also observed potential benefits beyond just testosterone numbers, like reported increases in lean body mass and muscle strength, which is obviously relevant here. And interestingly, one acute, very short-term study even saw some effects within just 10 hours, suggesting it might act relatively quickly for some individuals, though that needs more research.
Okay, that sounds, well, more promising than the overall picture you painted. But you mentioned 2 studies showed no effect, so it wasn't unanimous.
Correct. 2 studies included in their review did not find a statistically significant effect of fenugreek on total testosterone compared to placebo. So while fenugreek does show some promise and appears perhaps more consistent than most other herbs looked at, it's definitely not a universal guarantee across all research settings or populations. Still some inconsistency.
How about ashwagandha? That's another very popular adaptogen herb that's often marketed as a tea booster these days.
Yes, ashwagandha root and root leaf extracts also showed positive effects on testosterone levels in the studies included in this review, though perhaps with a slightly smaller number of studies available compared to fenugreek at the time of the review.
How many showed positive effects?
3 out of the 4 studies they looked at that investigated ashwagandha reported statistically significant increases in testosterone.
Any specific examples from the sources for ashwagandha's effects?
Yep. One study using a particular ashwagandha extract showed an increase in testosterone levels by about 16.6% in aging. Overweight men, similar population to one of the fenugreek studies. Another extract was shown to increase testosterone by 15.3% in young, healthy males, and a different study found a 17.3% increase in infertile men.
And what about the one study that didn't show a clear positive effect compared to placebo?
Right, that fourth study showed no statistically significant difference between the ashwagandha group and the placebo group for testosterone changes. Although, interestingly, testosterone levels did increase compared to their own baseline levels within the ashwagandha group in that particular trial, it just wasn't significantly more than placebo,
So kind of a weak signal, maybe.
possibly. And similar to fenugreek, some ashwagandha studies also noted potential benefits beyond just testosterone, such as reported increases in muscle strength.
Okay, so fenugreek and ashwagandha seem to have some degree of positive evidence, more than most others perhaps, but still not perfectly consistent or definitive. What about some of the other commonly found herbs? Asian ginseng, for instance. That's in a lot of energy and vitality blends.
Right, Asian ginseng is frequently found in these types of supplements. But based on the studies included in this systematic review, it mostly showed no effect on testosterone.
Really? No effect.
Mostly, yeah. Only 1 out of the 7 studies they reviewed looking at Asian ginseng demonstrated an increase in testosterone, and that was specifically in a group of overweight men who also had metabolic syndrome. The other 6 studies, conducted across different populations, like athletes, healthy men, and using various dosages, found no significant effect compared to placebo.
Okay, that's pretty underwhelming for ginseng. How about the really ubiquitous one, Tribulus terrestris, or just Tribulus? That's been marketed as a tea booster for ages.
Ah, tribulus. The sources are quite conclusive here, actually. One specific review paper cited within the materials explicitly states that the overall body of evidence indicates tribulus is ineffective at increasing testosterone levels in humans.
Ineffective, flat out.
That was the conclusion of that review, yes. And the systematic review of individual trials we've been discussing largely supports this conclusion, showing no significant difference compared to placebo in most studies that have looked at it. So, despite its long-standing popularity in marketing, the actual science for tribulus-boosting tea just doesn't seem to be there.
Wow. Okay. How about maca root? Another popular one, often for libido, but sometimes linked to tea.
Similar story to tribulus, based on the sources. A review by Gonzalez and colleagues, cited in the materials, specifically found that maca does not appear to affect serum testosterone concentrations.
Doesn't affect it.
Right. And again, the systematic review of individual trials largely supports this, showing no significant difference compared to placebo in the studies they evaluated.
Are there other common herbs the review found in these supplements that basically had no solid evidence of a testosterone effect? It really drives home how many ingredients might be in these things without much scientific backing for that specific claim.
Yes, absolutely. The review examined many others commonly found in these tea booster formulas. Based on the specific studies they included and evaluated, ingredients like rhodiola rosea, chlorophytum borevillianum, often marketed as safety muesli, Garcinia cambogia, usually for weight loss, Ganoderma lucidum, reishi mushroom, Urtica dioica, stinging nettle, Eurycoma longifolia, also known as longjack or tonkat ali, and Cordyceps sinensis. None of these showed significant effects on testosterone levels in the reviewed human studies.
That's a long list of popular ingredients with little to no tea-boosting evidence behind them.
It really underscored the point. While a supplement label might list a dozen different natural herbal ingredients, the reality is that the vast majority have very little, or often zero, reliable human evidence supporting their purported effect specifically on testosterone.
So even for the ones like fenugreek and ashwagandha that showed some positive findings, the overall picture seems to be one of generally weak, inconsistent evidence, particularly when you compare it to the strong evidence we discussed for lifestyle changes, like exercise and weight management. What are the major limitations of the research on these herbal supplements, according to systematic review? Why is it so hard to draw firm conclusions?
This context is absolutely critical when we're trying to evaluate these findings, you're right. The systematic review highlighted several really significant limitations that make drawing definitive conclusions very, very difficult.
Like what?
Firstly, there's just a serious lack, a paucity, of high-quality, well-designed, randomized controlled trials, RCTs. That's the gold standard for medical research.
Right.
Only 6, just 6, out of the 32 studies included in their entire review were judged by the researchers to have a low risk of bias. That means most of the available studies had methodological weaknesses, things like small sample sizes, poor blinding, potential conflicts of interest that could affect the reliability of their results.
So not many strong studies to begin with across all these herbs.
Exactly. And then there's a huge amount of heterogeneity or variation across the studies that do exist. They vary wildly.
In what ways?
Sample sizes can be tiny or moderate. The participants vary hugely young athletes, sedentary older men, men with infertility, etc. Study durations range from just a few hours in acute studies to several months. And perhaps most importantly, the type and dose of the herbal ingredients used vary all over the place.
And how the herbs are prepared matters too, right? Like the extraction method.
Absolutely critical. Different extraction methods using water versus alcohol, for example, can result in wildly different chemical compositions and therefore different potencies, even if it's technically from the same plant. This massive variability makes it incredibly hard to compare results between studies and figure out if an ingredient is genuinely effective, and if so, at what specific dose or in what specific form or preparation. It's like comparing apples and oranges sometimes.
And you mentioned the participants. Many studies weren't even done on the kind of person who might typically be buying these supplements off the shelf.
That's another good point raised. Many studies were conducted on specific populations, like young, healthy, active males who likely already have normal T levels, or in very specific clinical groups like infertile men. The findings from those studies might not necessarily apply to, say, a middle-aged man experiencing normal age-related decline, or someone with specific underlying health conditions hoping for a boost.
So, summing up the research limitations, it's messy.
Very messy. Because of all these limitations, few high-quality studies, massive variability, questionable applicability. The review explicitly concludes that further high-quality research is required before definitive conclusions on the efficacy and also the safety of many of these herbs can actually be made. The current evidence is just too patchy for most of them.
Okay, so the effectiveness is questionable for most ingredients. Beyond that, are there actual concerns about the safety and regulation of these supplements?
Absolutely, and this is a major point the sources emphasize, something consumers really need to be aware of. It's crucial to remember that dietary supplements are regulated very differently than pharmaceutical drugs in many places, including the U.S. under DSHEA, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act.
How are they different?
Well, fundamentally, supplements are not intended to treat, diagnose, prevent, or cure diseases. That's the territory of drugs. Supplements shouldn't be making claims that sound like they're treating a medical condition, which, you could argue, claiming to boost Ki when symptoms of medically low T exist comes pretty close to doing.
Right. But they clearly are making those kinds of claims on the labels.
They are, and the sources note that they are often poorly regulated. Manufacturers are largely responsible for ensuring safety and labeling accuracy, but there's limited pre-market approval or rigorous testing required by agencies like the FDA compared to drugs. They're often minimally studied for both efficacy and potential toxicity before they hit the market.
So that perception that just because something is labeled natural, it's automatically safe and risk-free is, well, it's wrong.
It's simply not true. Natural doesn't inherently mean safe. Many potent toxins are natural, after all, and even generally safe ingredients can be harmful in the wrong dose or context.
Did the sources uncover any specific safety findings or concerns related to the actual ingredients found in these T-booster supplements?
Yes, the systematic review that looked at the composition of those 50 T boosters found some pretty concerning levels of certain nutrients in many of them. They found that many products contained what they called supertherapeutic doses of vitamins and minerals doses, far, far exceeding the recommended daily allowance, RDA.
Like which ones?
For example, the median intake for many products was vastly over the RDA for several B vitamins and also for zinc. Even more concerning, some products contained amounts of zinc, vitamin B3, niacin, and magnesium that actually exceeded the established upper tolerable intake level, or UL, set by regulatory bodies like the Institute of Medicine.
The upper tolerable intake level, the UL, what does that mean exactly?
The UL is basically the highest level of daily nutrient intake that is likely to pose no risk of adverse health effects for almost all individuals in the general population. Consistently going above the UL for certain nutrients can significantly increase the risk of health problems.
And these supplements were actually delivering doses above those safe upper limits.
Yes, some of them were, according to that review. And the sources highlight the potential risks associated with such high doses. For instance, chronically excessive zinc intake beyond that UL can actually interfere with the absorption and utilization of other essential minerals, particularly copper and iron. This could potentially lead to deficiencies in those minerals over time.
What kind of problems could that cause?
Chronically high zinc intake has been linked to issues like copper deficiency anemia, reduced white blood cell counts, neutropenia, which can impair immune function, and other neurological issues in severe cases. So more isn't always better and can sometimes be harmful.
Were there any specific adverse events linked to the herbs themselves mentioned in the sources? beyond the vitamin-mineral overdosing?
The systematic review of the herbal trials reported a generally low incidence of adverse events overall across the studies they looked at, which is somewhat reassuring. However, the sources did cite a few specific examples of potential concerns mentioned elsewhere in the scientific literature.
Such as?
There was one case report cited that linked a supplement containing a fenugreek extract to pulmonary embolisms. Those are serious blood clots in the lungs. Now, a single case report doesn't prove causation, but it's a serious potential red flag.
Right.
And the sources also note that the FDA has issued general warnings about the potential risk of venous blood clots associated with prescription testosterone products as well. So it's an area of caution for testosterone modulation generally. Another example mentioned was a study looking at red clover, which is another herb sometimes found in supplements, although it didn't show a T-boosting effect in the review, which observed increases in liver enzymes in participants taking it, potentially indicating liver stress.
Okay, so putting it all together on supplements. The evidence for effectiveness for most ingredients is weak, conflicting, or just plain non-existent. Plus, there are significant concerns about poor regulation, potentially dangerous high doses of certain nutrients like zinc, and at least some noted instances or theoretical risks of adverse effects from the herbs themselves.
That is a very accurate summary of the picture painted by the sources we reviewed. They strongly lead to the conclusion that the sweeping claims made by many of these T-booster supplements, claims about increasing strength, boosting energy, burning fat, improving recovery, are very often completely unsupported by the available scientific data, either on their actual effect on testosterone levels or on those other promised benefits.
So the T-booster label and all the associated marketing hype.
Frequently, it seems, it's just not backed by solid, reliable evidence.
All right, wow, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground in this deep dive into testosterone and the various ways people try to influence its levels. Let's try and bring it all together now and quickly summarize the key takeaways from the sources you provided, especially for our fitness audience listening in.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I think we established that testosterone is, well, it's a vital hormone for male health. It impacts everything from those fundamental physical characteristics like muscle mass and strength, which is obviously a key focus for our audience, to overall well-being, energy levels, mood, bone health, and even potentially long-term disease risk.
Right.
And it's perfectly natural for levels to gradually decline with age, typically starting sometime around age 30.
And while many men with technically low testosterone might not notice anything significant, for those who do experience symptoms, things like persistent fatigue, reduced muscle gain for their effort, increased body fat, especially around the middle, low sex drive, or mood changes, these can absolutely impact both your health and your fitness goals. If you experience these symptoms and are concerned, the clear recommendation from the sources is to consult a doctor, get a morning blood test. But remember, interpreting the results involves considering your individual symptoms and health context, not just chasing a specific number, as defining optimal can be pretty nuanced.
Exactly. Then we looked at the natural strategies to support testosterone levels. And here, the evidence is actually really strong and consistent for several things. Maintaining a healthy body weight and particularly reducing excess abdominal fat is crucial.
Because of that aromatase enzyme, right?
Precisely. Because that fat converts testosterone into estrogen. And the good news is, losing weight through sensible diet and exercise is clearly shown to help significantly boost T levels in overweight individuals.
And regular exercise itself is another powerful tool. High-intensity resistance training, especially involving those large muscle groups, squats, deadlifts, presses, was highlighted as one of the most effective natural methods to potentially increase testosterone.
Yep. And alongside that, a balanced, nutrient-dense diet providing adequate healthy fats, the building blocks, sufficient protein, and essential micronutrients like zinc also supports healthy hormone production overall.
Crucially, though, for anyone training really intensely or dieting hard, the sources hammered home the negative impact of being in a state of low energy availability, basically, consistently burning way more calories than you're eating.
Right. That state of significant energy deficit, even if you're getting enough protein, can lower testosterone and disrupt that important testosterone to cortisol balance. Finding a sustainable balance between energy intake and expenditure is really vital for hormonal health, especially during intense training or cutting phases. Don't dig too deep a hole for too long.
And while certain micronutrients like zinc are definitely essential for testosterone synthesis, The evidence we discussed suggests that zinc supplementation is primarily effective in restoring levels in individuals who are actually deficient rather than significantly boosting levels higher in those who already have sufficient zinc status.
Well summarized. And then we took that critical look at the very popular world of T-booster herbal supplements. And the verdict there, based on the sources, was, well, pretty underwhelming for the most part.
Yeah, it seems the evidence is largely weak, inconsistent, or completely non-existent for the vast majority of ingredients commonly found in these products.
hmm While a couple, like fenugreek and ashwagandha, do show some promising results in some studies, even their efficacy isn't definitively proven across the board due to significant limitations in the existing research, inconsistent findings, methodological issues, and so on.
And perhaps just as importantly, we learned these supplements are often poorly regulated. They can contain supertherapeutic, potentially unsafe doses of certain vitamins and minerals like zinc. And there are at least documented cases or theoretical concerns about adverse effects linked to some of the herbal ingredients themselves.
Yeah, and the claims made on the labels feel stronger, more energy, burn fat, are frequently just not backed by solid scientific evidence regarding their actual effect on testosterone or those other promised benefits.
So while the marketing is incredibly compelling, the science seems to point overwhelmingly back towards those fundamental lifestyle habits. Exercise, nutrition, weight management, recovery, stress management as the most proven, reliable, and safest ways to naturally support healthy testosterone
That
levels.
really seems to be the bottom line from the evidence presented in these sources, yes.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to consider as you think about your own health and fitness journey. Given the robust, consistent scientific evidence supporting the significant impact of lifestyle changes like regular, intense exercise, maintaining a healthy weight, balanced nutrition, and managing energy balance on your testosterone levels,
Hmm.
contrasted with the generally weak, inconsistent, often completely lacking, and sometimes concerning evidence regarding the efficacy and safety of many popular herbal T booster supplements. Where should someone focused on achieving optimal health and performance truly prioritize their limited time, energy, and let's be honest, money when it comes to supporting their hormonal health?
It certainly seems the scientific literature we looked at today is strongly guiding you back to mastering the basics. Consistent, smart training, sound nutrition, adequate recovery, and managing overall lifestyle stressors. That's where the real leverage seems to be.
Indeed. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive today. We really hope this information empowers you to make informed, evidence-based decisions about your own health and fitness path.